Hi guys, today I am painting this little watercolor painting in mostly real time for you guys. I want to break down the process and every little thing that I think about when I'm painting my paintings, because there's so many little decisions that you make along the way when you're working on a piece like this that it's easy to forget all those little things you have to think about while you're working on it. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to just break this down and work a little bit slower and show you guys a little bit more of the little micro decisions that I make when I'm working on my watercolors, and also to talk about the watercolor process, since there's a lot to understand about how to deal with watercolors, how to solve problems with them. And anyways, I just want to jump right in with this. So with this painting, as you can see, I started off with just a thin pencil transfer of the sketch. So I wanted to be able to build up the line work with the watercolors as I worked on it, but also to let the pencil show through as line work in certain areas as well. And I actually really think that I'm really enjoying that with this kind of process. It works well with being able to be a standalone thing where it needs to be, but also to be able to be built up. So that's my starting off point. I also did a little micro color comp, I guess you could say, on a scrap piece of paper, where basically I just put down swatches of colors that I wanted to see together in this piece without necessarily painting them in all the exact places like it would be in the actual painting. So this, I just had a little swatch of each color that I had, and I knew basically where it was going to go, so that way I had those decisions already made, but in a much quicker and easier way to come about that. That's actually my favorite way to get a working color comp for really small pieces like this, where there's not a lot of different areas that I have to worry about figuring out how the color's going to play together. It's not nearly as complex. So I like to just go in and create a few different color palettes basically, and then pick the one that I think works the best for this. The one downside, well, there's multiple downsides, but the downside that comes from that is that I don't have a good value system figured out from that. So I just have to make sure that I've thought through what are the areas that I want to be the darkest, what do I want to be the lightest, and have that already in my head so that I know that certain areas are going to pop a little bit more. I'm trying to be a lot more delicate and thoughtful with the way that I'm painting skin too. I've found that I'm kind of throwing away a lot of the benefits that come from painting skin in watercolors because I'm being really rushed and quick with it. And one of the beautiful things about watercolors is that they're transparent, and skin is also transparent. So it's like this perfect medium made for that. So I tried really hard to make sure that I was creating much softer blends that built up over time, over different layers. And then that created a much more dynamic and pleasantly blended skin than what I normally get, and I'm actually a lot happier with this. Even though it was this very small fraction of a small painting, I do think that I learned a lot from trying to approach the skin in this painting a little bit more thoughtfully. And what I'm working on right now is probably one of my all-time favorite steps in any painting, and that's going in there and adding extra red tones to skin. It just adds so much life to it, and it's really fun to go in there and add this extra shock of saturation, then blend it out into the color family that fits, but something that's much more subdued and soft. And fingertips are probably my favorite application for this kind of solution. I just think that it adds so much to the hands. They look a lot more weathered and interesting, and like they have emotion to them. And I don't know, I love that part, being able to go in there and add a little bit more lifeblood to the character. And the brush that I use a lot throughout the painting of this piece, and pretty much any of my tiny pieces, is actually a synthetic one. It's a golden Trekell brush, but the reason I really prefer using these nice pointy synthetic brushes for small paintings is that they take their shape and they keep it really well. So it's very easy to go into areas like what I was just painting, the little fingers, and get in there and get these really sharp, precise areas painted nice and cleanly. And they don't hold as much as other variations of brushes, but it is one of my all-time favorites because of how reliably sharp it maintains and the fact that I can keep control over it. They also work really well for when I'm going in there and like with the fingers and like her nose and the blush areas on her face, where I wanted to go in with more saturation and then blend it out with just water. Because it's so pointy and sharp and easy to control, I was able to very carefully build up that blend rather than it suddenly bleeding out a bunch of clear water and then it flooding what pigment I already had down, which is something that I struggle with a lot actually. But because I was being more careful, and precise with this brush, with blending it out. It ended up a lot more controlled than it normally is, and I really liked that. And for the shadows on her skin, I wanted to focus on having this really softed blend, that thing that I'm trying really hard to practice on in this piece, as well as the sharp, hard edge shadows, because you're gonna find a mixture of those on pretty much anything. You'll get the soft blends when the shadow is following a natural curve on an object, and then you'll have these hard edged shadows where the light is hitting an object first and then casting a sharp shadow. So like shadows from her hair landing on her skin, that would be more of a sharp edge shadow, and then around her neck, that would be something that's softer. So I was trying to get a mixture of both, and that I think really is key to making things look a lot more alive and real in a way. I also wanted the shadows to be more of a purple color. That's actually one of my favorite ways to shade skin. It's key to remember too, just like the key things about lighting, where usually if you have a warm light, you'll have a cool shadow, or if you have a cool light, you'll have a warm shadow. So this one wasn't really as important because I didn't really focus on making sure that the light source had its own color value, or color temperature I should say, but I did go with my default purple shadow. I also wanted her skin tone to be more of like a pinky color because I wanted it to have this nice contrast between the green background. So if I had this green rich background and then her skin that was basically a variation of red, that helps both of them just really pop and have a lot more energy to this piece, so it's a little less subdued than say a completely monochromatic piece. Then on to painting her hair. I've been dealing with a few different ways to paint hair, and I'm not 100% sure exactly where I want to go forward with it, but there are a few options. So there's the option of how I portray the highlights in the hair. So I could go in with really stark, sharp highlights from the very beginning and preserve the whites of the paper, but I've been kind of leaning away from that. I actually think that I like the hair to be a little bit more natural in the way that it has these shines, I guess you could say, where it's not super bright and where the light's hitting it so that it just becomes white. I actually think that I like to be able to just preserve a lighter version of that color that I'm making her hair. So that's what I do moving forward with this, is that I go over all of her hair with a wash of this gray color. This is actually now one of my favorite, just like gray neutral colors. I'll link to the specific paint that I'm using for her hair down in the description if you're interested. But yes, I went in with just like a nice wash to give value over all of her hair. And then I would go in and start building up where there's the deeper shadows, where hair overlaps each other or it blends out. I also wanted to have a little bit of a darker blend towards the edges of the paper where the hair goes towards the edge. And I like that. I think that I actually, as small as this piece is and how little it actually is, I do think that I've gained quite a bit of skill as far as getting a softer gradient blend in watercolor. That really is something that I've been struggling with lately, so I'm happy with that. I was happy with the blend that I got from this lighter gray into this darker gray on her hair. I also really specifically planned out, again, where the values would be on this piece. Like I talked about at the beginning, it's really helpful to know where everything's going to be. That's really kind of key to making sure that you get a piece that you're happy with. But I wanted the value of her hair to be pretty dark because I knew that I'd want to go in and add a lot of extra strands of hair that wouldn't necessarily be in the line work. And that way I could just add them on top of the paint that was already there, the background color, and on top of her skin, and all of those details, I'd be able to just cover them up. And because it's a dark value, it wouldn't interfere with what I was putting down. That's also why I made sure that I painted the background and the skin first. That way I could go in with this black and add all of those extra little strands and details, and I wouldn't be afraid that it would be something that I'd have to carefully paint around later and then inevitably smudge into a much lighter value like her skin. And then going into painting the scissors, I wanted to make sure that it looked really shiny and metallic. That's something that I love getting. I love being able to show different textures or finishes, like metallic finishes in watercolors. It's kind of like this way of bringing in more realistic things into something that is not realistic. And I don't know, I love it. It feels really great when it ends up looking the way that I hope it does. And the key to getting something to look really shiny is to use really light lights or whites for your highlights, and then much darker areas for the shadows, and then a lot of variations in between I found. So I used a few different versions of yellows for this gold color, and as I got darker I actually started incorporating a little bit more red to the shadow so that there's not just this monochromatic look to it where it just has this straight yellow approach. It has a lot more life and richness to it by incorporating a little bit of that red. It also does help a little bit too because I do have just a little bit of like this blood on the end of the other end of the scissors after it's stabbed through the character, and then mimicking that in the shadows just helps balance it a little bit and keeps it from looking too stark on one side over the other. And as I'm painting it, I actually end up deciding to paint over the entire scissors with a glaze of yellow to harmonize it all, including those white highlights that I had. I decided that I wanted to just go back in with some white gouache and just knock these really bright, sharp highlights into the scissors. So I let myself cover that all with this harmonizing golden color that actually brings a lot more yellow into the scissors, and I really liked that. Then the final step, of course, is to go in with some actual real gold, some really, not real gold, but some really shiny metallic paint to add a little bit of glisten to the scissors and a few other places. So I did put it around the bottom edge of the scissors along where the shadow is, and then I also put it on as jewelry on the character herself. I love being able to find ways to incorporate something metallic like that on a few different places so it's not just one area that really stands out. But it's kind of a balancing act. If you go, at least if I have, because I've done it in the past, if I go too much with too much metallics everywhere, it ends up becoming really overwhelming. So there's a balance between finding a way to make sure that it stands out and it looks important and special, but not so much that it is kind of this sore thumb in the piece. So I added it to a few different areas. On the scissors, it's a lot more subtle because it's the same color family, and then on the character, it stands out a little bit more. And then I get to have the final step, which is just peeling off the masking tape, which is really satisfying to watch this nice clean edge of watercolor be revealed. I did paint this piece specifically for the frame that I have for her, and I love being able to do that, to be able to take design ideas and inspiration from the frame and then bring it into the painting, and then finally put the painting into the frame. And this little painting is available at my shop. It is framed, so it's ready to be displayed right away. I'll have a link down in the description that'll take you over to my shop if you want to check that out. I also have a link to my Patreon, which is a great way to help support me and this channel. I am incredibly grateful to all of my patrons over on Patreon, so thank you guys so much. I really do appreciate it. And this weekend I will be at Denver Pop Culture Con, so if you want to come by and say hello, I'll be at table N17 in the Artist Valley. I'm really excited to be able to see some of you guys there, but that's it for today. So I'll be back next week with some more art content. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you then.